The nays are 205. The resolution is adopted, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by the direction of the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol, I call up House Report 117-152.
The clerk will report the title.
House Calendar number 39, House Report number 117-152, report to accompany resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Stephen K. Bannon in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with a subpoena duly issued by the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol.
Pursuant to House Resolution 727, the report is considered read. For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol, I call up House Resolution 730 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 730, resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Stephen K. Bannon in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with a subpoena duly issued by the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol.
Pursuant to House Resolution 727, the resolution is considered read and shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided among and controlled by the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, the gentlelady from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, and an opponent or their respective designees. The gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, the gentlewoman from Ms. Cheney, and the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks, each will control 20 minutes, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material on this measure.
Without objection, so ordered.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, since Speaker Pelosi asked me to chair the January 6th Select Committee, I spent a lot of time thinking about the importance of what we are doing, the weight of it, the urgency. We need to give the American people answers about what happened. There needs to be swift accountability. But there are longer-term considerations too, Madam Speaker. I'm a grandfather, and when I talk to my grandkids about that horrific attack on our democracy on January 6th, my mind jumps ahead to the future in store for them. Questions about whether American democracy, as we know it now, will remain strong, whether it will withstand future tests. That's got to be the legacy of this committee's work. To be sure, we're going to answer questions about what happened on that day. But we also need to draw a roadmap for making sure our democracy remains strong tomorrow. We'll work backward at what happened and try to explain how and why the insurrection came about. But we'll also look forward and generate recommendations for legislative policy and process changes that will help ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. And when we get to the end of this process and look back, we're going to ask ourselves, did we do everything in our power to uncover every fact? Did we use the tools at our disposal to get a full accounting, or did we let someone stand in our way without facing consequences? Did we learn what we needed to know for Congress to forge legislation to help ensure we never experience another January 6th again? That's why we are taking up this resolution today, citing Steve Bannon with criminal contempt and referring him for prosecution by the Justice Department. We didn't choose to be here. This isn't about punishing Steve Bannon. The Select Committee would prefer and frankly expect all witnesses to fully cooperate. But Steve Bannon has led us down this path by refusing to cooperate in any way with our investigation. We believe Mr. Bannon has information valuable to our probe. He was deeply involved in the so-called Stop the Steal campaign. He was reportedly in a war room meeting the day before the riot and had been pressuring the former president to try to stop the counting of the Electoral College ballots. He himself warned that all hell would break loose on January 6th. We believe he can help inform our inquiry as to how the riot came together and what it was intended to achieve. He's clearly an important witness. So we subpoenaed him, and unlike other witnesses who have engaged and worked with our team to find a way to cooperate, Mr. Bannon told us he wouldn't comply because the former president told him not to. He hid behind vague and baseless claims of privilege. That's just not acceptable. The Select Committee told Mr. Bannon several times that he would face the consequences if he didn't change course. Well, he didn't change course, and his actions have brought us to this point. Madam Speaker, we need to make it clear that no person is above the law. We need to take a stand for the integrity of the Select Committee's investigation and for the integrity of this body. What sort of precedent would it set for the House of Representatives if we allow a witness to ignore us flat out without facing any kind of consequences? What message would it send to other witnesses in our investigation? I'm not willing to find out. I'm not willing to get to the end of the Select Committee's work and look back wishing we had done more to uncover all the facts, not when we know what's on the line, when we know that our democracy isn't yet out of danger, when we know that the forces that tried to overturn the election persist in their assault on the rule of law. Our investigation is going forward. We're hearing from witnesses, reviewing documents, analyzing data. Mr. Bannon stands alone in his defiance, and we will not stand for it. We will not allow anyone to derail our work because our work is too important, helping ensure that the future of American democracy is strong and sure and secure. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from Wyoming.
Madam Speaker, a year ago today, the election was still a couple of weeks off. We knew it would be a tight race, but most of us did not anticipate that President Trump, or any president, frankly, would ever simply reject the outcome of the vote. President Trump had the right to challenge the outcome in our state and federal courts, which have an appropriate and constitutional role in resolving election claims. But what he did thereafter has no precedent in our history. He rejected the court's rulings in dozens of cases, including the rulings of judges President Trump himself appointed. He rejected what his own Department of Justice officials told him over and over again, that they found no evidence of widespread fraud sufficient to overcome the election. He rejected the conclusions of both the Department of Justice and the intelligence community that the Dominion voting machines had not secretly changed the election outcome. President Trump had no factual or constitutional basis for his claims, and the lawyers he found who would carry his false claims forward have paid the consequences. Rudy Giuliani's license to practice law has been suspended, and Sidney Powell has been sanctioned by a federal judge. But Donald Trump persisted, attempting through every manner he could imagine to try to overturn the outcome of the election. And we all saw what happened. The people who attacked this building have told us on video, on social media, and now before the federal courts exactly what motivated them. They believed what Donald Trump told them, that the election was stolen and that they needed to take action. Today, Madam Speaker, we are here to address one witness Mr. Steve Bannon. I urge all Americans to watch what Mr. Bannon said on his podcast on January 5th and 6th. It is shocking and indefensible. He said all hell is going to break loose. He said, quote, "We are coming in right over the target. This is the point of attack we have always wanted." Madam Speaker, there are people in this chamber right now who were evacuated with me and with the rest of us on that day during that attack. People who now seem to have forgotten the danger of the moment, the assault on the Constitution, the assault on our Congress. People who you will hear argue that there is simply no legislative purpose for this committee, for this investigation, or for this subpoena. In fact, there is no doubt that Mr. Bannon knows far more than what he said on the video. There is no doubt that all hell did break loose. Just ask the scores of brave police officers who were injured that day protecting all of us. The American people deserve to hear his testimony. Let me give you just 4 examples of the legislative purpose of this investigation. First, the plot we are investigating, involving Mr. Eastman, Mr. Giuliani, Mr. Bannon, President Trump, and many others. Their plot attempted to halt or delay our count of electoral votes and reverse the outcome of the 2020 election. The 1887 Electoral Count Act is directly at issue, and our investigation will lead to recommendations to amend or reform that act. Second, while the attack was underway, President Trump knew it was happening. Indeed, he may have been watching it all unfold on television, and yet he took no immediate action to stop it. This appears to be a supreme dereliction of duty by President Trump, and we are evaluating whether our criminal laws should be enhanced to supply additional and more severe consequences for this type of behavior. Third, we know from our investigation to date that President Trump was pressuring the Department of Justice in late December 2020 to support his false claims that the election was stolen. Several brave and honorable Trump appointees at the department flatly refused to go along with this fraud and threatened to resign. We are evaluating what, if any, additional laws may be required to prevent a future president from succeeding in any such effort. Fourth, we know that President Trump made efforts to persuade state election officials to, quote, find votes, to change the election outcome in his favor. We are evaluating whether the criminal laws of the United States should be enhanced to make the penalty for this type of behavior even more severe, and if so, in what manner. Mr. Bannon's own public statements make clear he knew what was going to happen before it did, and thus he must have been aware of and may well have been involved in the planning of everything that played out on that day. The American people deserve to know what he knew and what he did. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Indiana.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. 3 months ago, for the first time in the history of Congress, Speaker Pelosi vetoed Jim Jordan and I from serving on the Select Committee to investigate January 6th. Not all firsts are worth celebrating. It was a shameful and divisive decision with real consequences. Today, because of that decision, there is no committee conducting a legitimate investigation into January 6th. Congress is prohibited from conducting criminal investigations, period. But that's exactly what the Select Committee is doing, conducting an illicit criminal investigation into American citizens. Steve Bannon was a private citizen before, after, and during January 6th. So why is the Select Committee interested in Steve Bannon? It's simple. He is a Democrat Party boogeyman. The Select Committee despises Steve Bannon's politics. so they're abusing their power to put him in jail. The committee explained it's seeking documents from Mr. Bannon because he helped, quote, construct and participated in the permitted and legal Stop the Steal rally. To date, the Select Committee has subpoenaed 11 other private citizens for organizing the Stop the Steal rally. Here, in the land of the free, 12 American citizens are under congressional investigation for the sole crime of planning a legal political protest. Never in the history of Congress has a committee or a political party stooped so low. Congress has no authority to conduct criminal investigations. Congress can only issue subpoenas that serve a legislative purpose. The question that the committee must answer is, why are they seeking information about a permitted political rally? What legislative purpose does that serve? Is the committee considering laws to limit Americans' right to political protest? It's clear that the Select Committee doesn't give a lick about Congress's subpoena authority. Does the committee share the same disdain for the First Amendment? I wouldn't put it past them. As we all know, the DOJ has a highly active criminal investigation into the January 6th attack. They've made something like 600 arrests. As I said, very active, even hyperactive, compared to the Biden DOJ's typical reaction to political violence. But the Department of Justice's investigation isn't comprehensive. There are still questions that only Congress can answer. Congress still has a role to play. But the Select Committee has completely abandoned that role. Why else does the Select Committee want to hear from Mr. Bannon? Because on January 5th, Mr. Bannon warned that, quote, all hell was going to break loose tomorrow. So according to the Select Committee, no person could have predicted that violence might occur that day. According to the committee, that Mr. Bannon warned of violence on the 5th is proof that Mr. Bannon had, quote, foreknowledge of the attack on the 6th. Never mind that the FBI found that the attack wasn't coordinated. Never mind that the Capitol Police received actionable intelligence about a potential violence occurring weeks before the 6th. Never mind that every member of Congress, every single D.C. resident, every American with internet access knew that violence was a possibility on January 6th. The question the committee should be asking is this: how did the United States Capitol Police, the D.C. Metropolitan Police, and the FBI all have no clue that, quote, all hell was going to break loose? Steve Bannon, a private citizen, knew. So why didn't the Capitol Police have enough riot shields? Why did it take multiple hours to deploy the National Guard? These are worthwhile questions, and Congress has a duty to answer them. Because January 6th was an enormous intelligence failure. There was a breakdown in security, a breakdown that was repeated on Good Friday when Officer Billy Evans was brutally murdered. The issues that plagued the Capitol Police on January 6th have not been fixed. In fact, according to a Capitol Police whistleblower, the officers most responsible for the intelligence failure on the 6th were promoted by Speaker Pelosi's team. To be clear, the Select Committee is engaged in an unconstitutional political investigation, a sham investigation conducted by a sham committee that refuses to answer real questions about what happened on January 6th. The Capitol was attacked, and instead of figuring out what went wrong, the committee launched its own attack on Congress's norms. The Select Committee's politicization of January 6th cuts both ways. The committee's inaction has made the Capitol less secure, and the committee's actions have further separated Congress from its constitutional roles. The American people and the United States Capitol Police deserve a real investigation into the 6th, and the Select Committee has abandoned them. I urge all of my colleagues to make the moral vote, do the right thing. I urge you to to vote for the rule of law, for the institution of Congress, and against the Select Committee's dangerous abuse of Congress's oversight authority. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Mississippi.
Madam Speaker, I heard the Speaker opposing this amendment. We're not seeking actually information from Mr. Bannon because of his opinions. We issued the subpoena because we believe he's knowledge of relevant facts that we need to discover. We're not violating anything, and certainly not Mr. Bannon's amendment rights. The only violation we can talk about is the violation of this building on January 6th. And Mr. Bannon's claim that the election was stolen helped foment that attack. Investigating that is also part of our charter. Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from Wyoming.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I just wanted to correct the record. The gentleman from Indiana asserted that the FBI has found there was no coordination. That's just simply not true. The gentleman also said that he is not on the committee. He noted that the Speaker had determined that he wouldn't be on the committee. So I would like to introduce for the record a number of letters the gentleman from Indiana has been sending to federal agencies dated September 16th, 2021, for example, signing his name as the ranking member of the committee. He's just informed the House that he's not on and that he, in fact, is not on. I'd like to introduce those for the record. And now, Madam Speaker, I would like to yield to Representative Lofgren.
Time.
I would like to yield 3 minutes, Madam Speaker.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would note that the gentleman from Indiana is incorrect. We are not pursuing a law enforcement investigation. Only the DOJ can do that. What we are doing is taking the steps that are provided for under the congressional contempt statute that has existed for many decades, because the Select Committee's charge is to get to the bottom of what happened on January 6th. Who planned it? Who paid for it? What was the intent? And what legislative steps can we recommend to remove future threats to our Constitution? To do that, we need information, both documents and testimony, and to get that, we issue subpoenas. Now, what is a subpoena? Is it just a suggestion, a mere request, an encouragement to testify? Nope. A subpoena is a writ issued by a government agency, in this case the Congress, to compel testimony or production of evidence. When you get a subpoena, the law requires you to comply. If you think there may be some valid reason that excuses you from telling the truth under oath, you have to come in and make your case to the committee. Steve Bannon is the only person who's outright refused to engage with the committee. He thinks that if he simply obstructs Congress by not showing up, he'll escape the consequences. But as Theodore Roosevelt said, no man is above the law and no man is below the law. If you get a subpoena, you can't hide behind vague, immaterial claims of privilege. The cases make it clear. Judicial Watch, Nixon versus GSA, the McGahn case, executive privilege is limited to immediate White House advisors on government policy. Bannon's a private citizen. His extravagant claims can't shield his conversations and plotting with other private citizens. His status, according to the cases, doesn't get executive privilege protection. He has no absolute immunity. America, what would happen if you received a subpoena from Congress or a court? Do you think you could get away with just saying, go fly a kite? You'd be held accountable. And so should Mr. Bannon be held to account for defying the law regarding this subpoena. To defend the rule of law, we must vote yes on this resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time to the gentlelady.
Gentleman from Indiana.
Madam Speaker, no one has said that the Select Committee doesn't have a legislative purpose. Let's be very clear. There's important work that, frankly, we wish they were doing, like answering why this campus was left unprotected and what we are doing to keep it from happening again. That hasn't happened yet. What we are saying is that the subpoenas that have so far been issued do not ask for information that would meet any legitimate legislative purpose. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield to my colleague from the great state of Illinois, Mr. Davis.
For what amount of time, please?
As much time as he may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to my friend and colleague from Indiana, Mr. Banks. I can tell you when I got elected to serve in this body almost 9 years ago, I didn't expect to be standing here today to talk about such an important issue. I spent 16 years as a congressional staffer working for a member of Congress who I looked up to and who respected this institution for what it was and what it meant to our country. And when I came to Congress to serve with him, I had that utmost respect for this institution at the same time. That's why I wanted to be part of the House Administration Committee, because I wanted to make this Congress and this House work better, act in a much more bipartisan manner, make sure that we protect those who are on this campus, but also at the same time protect those who protect us. And Madam Speaker, we are now months and months post January 6th. In my many conversations with U.S. Capitol Police officers and those who work on this campus, they have the same concerns I have. The question they ask is, why were we so unprotected on January 6th? And what has changed since then? Getting to the bottom of those questions should be the top priority for all of us in this House. There are serious security vulnerabilities that have not been addressed by this House in 11 months after January 6th, and this is what the majority has decided to spend its time on. Holding a private citizen who wasn't even part of the administration at the time in contempt for refusing to comply with House Democrat subpoenas. This is after more than 600 people have been arrested for their role in the tragedies we saw on January 6th. And when I get the article, I would like to submit for the record, Madam Speaker, a Reuters article that talks about senior officials stating at the FBI that there was no organized effort to overthrow the government on January 6th. So I will submit it once I get a copy of that. I did not bring it with me. But our job, again, is to secure this Capitol. We've never seen a breach like the one that we saw that day. And it's our responsibility to make sure it doesn't happen again. But that hasn't been done under the leadership of this House. We've had 2 independent reports regarding January 6th. One bipartisan report in the Senate and another one commissioned by the Speaker herself. And that came out in March. These have never been acted on. But this is what the Select Committee has been working on. The Capitol Police IG has released 7 reports related to January 6th, making recommendations on what is needed to secure this Capitol. To my disappointment, the majority has not acted in a meaningful way to ensure all 103 IG findings are implemented. These reports have all told us what the problems are and the recommendations on how to fix them. But Congress, us, have failed to even debate these changes, let alone act on them. We know massive changes to intel, perimeter protection, training, leadership structure, decision-making processes, and many, many more are needed, but neither the Select Committee nor the Committee on House Administration seem at all interested in ensuring these changes are made. The Committee on House Administration, which has oversight of security, hasn't held a single hearing since August 5th, with no upcoming hearings scheduled according to the majority's website. And the Select Committee, right now, as we see, is just purely focused on political subpoenas. And without objection, I'd like to introduce these articles into the record, Madam Speaker.
That objection is so ordered.
Thank you. Additionally, a number of questions from that day still remain unanswered. I'm still waiting for the Speaker of the House to answer a letter I sent her back in February that asked why the National Guard requests by then Police Chief Son were denied. And why was the Speaker's office and the Speaker involved in eventually approving the request? Why the House Sergeant at Arms has refused to comply with preservation and production requests from my office. And we have many, many more questions about why the Capitol was so unprepared that day. Our top priority should be ensuring our Capitol is never as vulnerable as it was on January 6th. But this majority has done absolutely nothing to make the security changes needed to make this Capitol safer. Madam Speaker, we must do better. We have not fixed the institutional problems with our security apparatus that led to the lack of preparation, the danger that our brave officers were put in on that day and any other possible day like that in the future. That's a failure of leadership in this institution. We must fix the problems that led to the terrible security posture here. And I will tell you, after witnessing what we saw in a few different days and security postures that this House was put into a couple of other days since January 6th, and I urge you to talk to the brave officers that stand around these buildings and protect all of us every day. Ask them the same question I do. Ask them if we have put them in a better position than they were in on January 5th. And the answer out of every single officer I ask that question to is no. What is stopping this House from fixing the problems? It's a lack of will. It's a lack of focusing on the true issues that led for them to be put in a dangerous spot on January 5th. Instead, we're talking politics. It's wrong, and we must do better. I've said time and time again, and I stand willing to work with my Democrat colleagues to make this House, this Capitol, safer for everyone. Instead, it's all about political points like the one being scored today. I'm disappointed. You can tell. My frustration is going to continue to boil over until we're in a position to fix the problems that I've laid out and that we know exist. I yield back.
Gentleman from Mississippi.
Madam Speaker, in response to gentleman from Illinois' statement, the first hearing of the Select Committee, we actually held and interviewed 4 officers who put their lives on the line defending all of us who work here in this body. So I assure you, my directions to the committee have always been, we'll look at all the facts and circumstances surrounding what occurred. We're genuinely interested in getting to the facts. We're working to get the answers, and that's why we are on the floor today, to get answers from Steve Bannon about what he knew, what he did leading up to January 6th. Also, the gentleman from Indiana, I'm glad he finally agreed that the Select Committee has a legitimate legislative purpose. And that's why we're here today pursuing that legislative purpose. So I'm happy that the record will reflect his comments. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Murphy, a valued member of the Select Committee.
For 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this resolution to refer Stephen Bannon to the Department of Justice for prosecution for contempt of Congress. You know, it didn't have to be this way. Mr. Bannon, a self-professed patriot, could have done the patriotic thing and cooperated with our bipartisan committee. If Mr. Bannon is proud of the role he played in connection with January 6th, he should be eager to tell his side of the story. And instead, he's acting like a man who has something to hide. Our committee seeks only the truth. That is our legal charge and our moral obligation. We cannot let any individual impede our inquiry, and we will not tolerate Mr. Bannon's evasion. And why must we be so unrelenting in our pursuit of truth? Because on January 6th, the greatest nation on earth came under attack. And this attack wasn't carried out by officials in Beijing, Moscow, or Tehran, or foreign terrorists even. It was an attack conducted by our fellow citizens, regular Americans who were radicalized because they believed outrageous lies fed to them by other Americans in positions of power and influence. The attack was launched against the seat and symbol of our republic. It was designed to disrupt the certification of the presidential election results, to defy the will of the voters. This was no peaceful protest in a proud American tradition. It was violent and vicious. Members of the mob wielded weapons. They called for the death of the vice president. They hunted members of Congress. They caused severe harm to law enforcement officers. And the real disservice to the police comes from those who want to whitewash the violence of January 6th and pretend that the riot of that day was anything short of the violent attack it was, aimed at derailing the peaceful transfer of power. America's not just a place, it's an idea. And on January 6th, there was an attack on the very idea of America. And I believe that patriots of all political stripes should want to protect our capital, this country, and her Constitution. Our committee will make a full accounting of what happened, and will make recommendations to ensure it never happens again.
Gentlelady from Wyoming.
I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the Vice Chair for yielding. Like many of my colleagues, I was right here on the House floor when the violent mob attacked our Capitol. I saw those doors shaking, nearly overrun with rioters attempting to enter. I saw my colleagues shed their jackets and roll up their sleeves, preparing for the eventuality. And I saw Capitol Police acting quickly and thoughtfully to conduct a successful evacuation of members from this chamber. Their actions undoubtedly saved lives. What we didn't know at the time was that on the steps of the Capitol were the Capitol and the Metro PD officers engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Officer Michael Fanone told us he was grabbed, beaten, and tased, all while being called a traitor to this country. This is what officers dealt with to defend our democracy. Some lost their lives. Many are still living with both the physical wounds and the trauma that they suffered that day. This is what our officers dealt with to defend democracy. Officer Harry Dunn told us more than 6 months later, January 6th still isn't over for me. These officers are heroes. I want to thank the chair and the vice chair for their leadership in making our first hearing directly from those heroes in their own words. We wanted to hear and make sure that all of our colleagues in this country heard firsthand what we experienced on the ground that day. We asked them to explain the violence they had to endure to protect our democratic process. And in return, they made one simple request: to get to the bottom of this. They want answers, and quite frankly, they deserve answers. So far, both the Metro PD and the Capitol Police have been excellent allies in this investigation. They've cooperated, shared their stories and expertise, and provided us with key evidence and accounts of the violence they endured that day. And we owe it to them to see this investigation through. The vote we take today is a crucial step toward removing a roadblock in our investigation. We owe it to every officer who put their life on the line that day and every day to protect us here in the Capitol. We owe them answers, and this committee intends to get to those answers by all means necessary. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this resolution. Thank you. I yield back to the
gentleman from Indiana.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger, an Iraq and Afghanistan Air Force veteran and a lieutenant colonel in the Air National Guard.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Well, I thank the chairman for yielding. Let me just say first, Madam Speaker, as a Republican, don't let my side use the security posture as the straw man argument in this. The reality is that's the equivalent of blaming the victim of a crime for the crime. And while it is important, that's not what we're here to talk about today. Madam Speaker, voting on a criminal contempt resolution is not the position we hoped to be in, but Steve Bannon went out of his way to earn this resolution before us, and now we must approve it. Mr. Bannon's willful disregard for the Select Committee's subpoena demonstrates his utter contempt for the American people's right to know how the attacks on January 6 came about. He has advanced a ludicrous legal argument in support of his decision not to cooperate or comply, a decision that defies the rule of law and rejects the will of the American people. Mr. Bannon's reported actions put him near the center of the investigation into the events surrounding January 6th. His own words strongly suggest that the actions of the mob that stormed the Capitol and invaded this very chamber came as no surprise to him. He and a few others were, by all accounts, involved in planning that day's events and encouraged by those who attacked the Capitol, our officers, and our democracy. I have no doubt that Mr. Bannon's scorn for our subpoena is real, but no one, and I repeat, no one, is above the law, and we need to hear from him. As the Select Committee's contempt report states, it was Mr. Bannon who on January 5th predicted with chilling accuracy, quote, "All hell is going to break loose tomorrow." On his radio show that day, he stated, quote, "It's not going to happen like you think it's going to happen. Okay? It's going to be quite extraordinarily different. All I can say is strap in. You made this happen, and tomorrow it's game day. So strap in. Let's get ready." And it was Mr. Bannon who is recorded as saying, quote, "It's all converging, and now we're on the point of attack tomorrow." Mr. Bannon said these things publicly as a private citizen, someone deeply involved with Stop the Steal movement, and he said them nearly 3 years after leaving his job at the White House. Mr. Bannon was also reportedly among the small group of Trump confidants assembled at the Willard Hotel to discuss plans to stop or delay the January 6th count. Is it any wonder that the Select Committee needs to hear from him, that we want to see related materials that he has? Furthermore, does anyone really believe Mr. Bannon's actions are covered by a blanket, no questions asked claim of executive privilege, one the former president has never actually made? Madam Speaker, Steve Bannon is a key witness to the Select Committee's probe. He has yet to say or produce anything in response to the subpoena, and his assertion of executive privilege is far-fetched in the extreme and not his to make. I urge my colleagues to join me to support the contempt resolution, and I yield back.
Gentlelady from Wyoming.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the distinguished gentlelady from Wyoming, and thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, Donald Trump said the insurrection took place on November 3rd. No, Mr. Trump, I'm sorry. That's what we call an election in America, an election that was validated by more than 60 federal and state courts, including before 8 judges nominated to the bench by President Trump himself, and all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, all of them rejecting every claim of electoral fraud and corruption that was advanced. We know an insurrection when we see one in this body because we lived through one. Under the banner of this continuing and deranged big lie, the Stop the Steal movement brought down a violent insurrection against this Congress and an attempted coup against Vice President Mike Pence. They interrupted the counting of electoral college votes for the first time in American history. They caused the worst attack on Congress since the War of 1812, and they injured and wounded more than 140 police officers, Capitol officers, Metropolitan Police Department officers, and others, breaking their noses, breaking their necks, breaking their vertebrae, breaking their arms, breaking their legs, breaking their hearts and their spirits. We are investigating the attack on American democracy because we are Americans. We are investigating the attack on Congress by domestic enemies of our Constitution because we are sworn to do so by our oaths of office. But now, the big lie has become a big cover-up. After being impeached twice by the House, after losing in 61 different courts, After seeing a 57-43 vote against him in the U.S. Senate in the most sweeping bipartisan Senate presidential conviction vote in American history, Trump now tries to get his followers like Steve Bannon not to testify here and not to turn over evidence that they have about this vicious assault on American democracy. In America, when you are subpoenaed to testify in court or in Congress, you show up, period. You can invoke your Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination to specific questions if you think you committed a crime. You can claim executive privilege to specific questions if you think you're President of the United States. But you cannot blow off a subpoena in America. You cannot sit on your couch and defy the people's representatives in Congress. So we must enforce the rule of law here, my colleagues. We must do it. If you act deliberately with sneering, cavalier contempt for the American people and their representatives, we will hold you in contempt. We will get to the truth of the violent assault on America. I yield back.
Gentleman from Indiana.
Speaker, you don't have to look far to realize the absurdity of what's happening in Congress today. In fact, Politico just reported moments ago that the Capitol Police whistleblower is telling Politico that they have not been contacted by the January 6th Select Committee, the Capitol Police whistleblower. He said that the United States Capitol Police deserves more scrutiny than it's gotten so far, and that he would talk to investigators if they reach out to him. And the Select Committee has not reached out to the Capitol Police whistleblower. Yet here we are today focused on holding a private citizen in contempt, an unprecedented action by this sham committee and their sham investigation. With that, I yield to my colleague from Florida, Mr. Gates.
How much time?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Why are we here on the floor of the House of Representatives listening to the Democrats and socialists and their Republican puppets reviewing Steve Bannon's podcast? Can't imagine that that would be the case if they actually had a bill, a reconciliation deal, legislation to help the American people. We're not here because of democracy. Save me the alligator tears on that. These are the folks who assaulted our democracy for 2 years under the specter of the Russia hoax. And it's sure not about violence, because they didn't seem to give a damn when our country was being engulfed in flames during the riots in the summer of 2020. It's not about congressional process. If it was about congressional process, Democrats would be doing what they have done in other cases. They would go to court. But the reason they haven't gone to court, like they did for Trump's taxes, in the Deutsche Bank subpoenas, in the Mazars matter, or in the Don McGahn matter, is because in each of those circumstances, they did not prevail in court. The courts realized that their subpoenas were overly broad. So instead of using the real process, here we are just enduring this politics. And because they can't build back better, they've just decided to build back meaner. I yield back.
Gentleman from Mississippi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just for the record, again, the gentleman from Indiana referenced the whistleblower. We have not talked to the whistleblower, but we've talked to the whistleblower's lawyer. And we're doing our work. So clearly, since he's quoting Politico, I want him to just get the record straight. Madam Speaker, I yield 2.5 minutes to a gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. Luria, who served 2 decades in the Navy and was among the first women to serve in the Navy's nuclear power program.
Gentleman is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We reaffirmed that oath on January 3rd. Yet only 3 days later in this very chamber, this body was assaulted while carrying out the peaceful transfer of power, the very hallmark of our democracy. I first took that oath when I was 17 years old and entered the Naval Academy. I was willing to put my life on the line to serve my country and protect the foundation of this republic, a foundation that was shaken but not broken on January 6th. Mr. Bannon, a former naval officer like me, at one point understood this oath. He took it multiple times. He served his country honorably in the Navy. I don't know what happened between the time Lieutenant Bannon left the Navy and today. What forces corrupted his understanding of this oath? Mr. Bannon has been given the opportunity to voluntarily provide information relative to the work of our committee, but he's not complied. But truly, this is larger than Mr. Bannon, and this is larger than this investigation, and this is larger than the tragic and horrific events of January 6th. This vote is a test of that oath. To my colleagues who chose to vote against enforcing the subpoena, you're saying to all future men and women who are called before this body that they can ignore a subpoena from Congress without consequence. You can make that choice today, but that will be a vote to abdicate the power of the legislative branch in which you are elected to serve. That would be a vote to undermine the government and the Constitution which you took an oath to support and defend. The consequences of that vote won't be limited to this investigation and this subpoena alone. Your vote will do serious, long-lasting damage to Congress as an institution. And that, in turn, will do serious damage to our country, which we all love so dearly. We ask our young men and women in uniform to go forth every day and protect us, to protect this republic, to protect our form of government. I'm asking you to do the same, to protect our democracy from those forces to destroy it within. And I yield back the remainder of our time.
Gentlelady from Wyoming.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Indiana.
Madam Speaker, I yield as much time as he may consume to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. Look, we've seen the worst 10 months of any administration in history. We went from a secure border to chaos. We went from safe streets to violent crime. We've seen stable prices turn into inflation and empty shelves. The respect around the world we had is now turned into the debacle that was the exit from Afghanistan. And we went from peace in the Middle East with the Abraham Accords to thousands of rockets being fired on our friend and ally Israel, not to mention energy independence, to now the spectacle of the President of the United States begging OPEC to increase production. But what scares me most is what this administration and Democrats are doing to freedom. Every right we enjoy under the First Amendment has been assaulted over the last year. Your right to practice your faith, still places today in the country where a full congregation can't meet on Sunday morning. Your right to petition your government, your right to assemble, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, every single one's been attacked. We just learned in the Judiciary Committee from the Attorney General. Attorney General, National School Boards Association on last month, September 29th, sends a letter to the President of the United States asking the FBI to get involved in local school board matters. 5 days later, the Attorney General issues a memo to do just that. First sentence of the memo says this. This is the Attorney General's memo. In recent months, there's been a disturbing spike in harassment, intimidation, threats at school board meetings. We ask him a simple question. What's the evidence for that spike in threats? What's the data? What did you review? Guess what his answer was? His only evidence, the only thing he reviewed, was the letter from the School Board Association, from a political organization. And now they're going to target parents at school board meetings, and we have the January 6th committee issuing subpoena after subpoena. 11 of the people they've issued subpoenas to were names on an application asking the government for permission to hold the rally. Independent individuals exercising their First Amendment right to assemble, asked the government for permission, the government granted them permission, and now these 20 and 30-year-olds whose name are on that application, they're going to be deposed by these guys for simply exercising their first. Here's what they're asking them. Here's what they ask them. We want to know who the selection of speakers, who the speakers were and how were they selected. We want to know any communications these people who put their names on a permit, got permission from the government. We want to know any member of Congress you talked to. Wow. Your right to petition your government? That's what they want to subpoena. That's why they're subpoenaing these people? This is scary where they want to go. I mean, these questions, coordination of speakers, discussions of content. This sounds like what the IRS did to people 10 years ago when they were asking 501c groups applying for tax-exempt status, do you pray at the start of your meeting? I mean, first it's school boards, then it's people applying for a permit. We saw what they did to people, what the IRS did to people just a few years ago. Not to mention what else the committee's doing. Preservation letters to all the carriers, all the companies. Preserve every call, every email, every text. Think about that. Every call someone made to hundreds and hundreds, supposedly, according to news reports, they've done this for. Text to your spouse, calls to your mom. Preserve it all. And this is just what we know about. This is just what's been reported. I mean, now Steve Bannon. And now Steve Bannon. Mr. Bannon is a target of the investigation, for the investigation, because, quote, this is from the Select Committee's own report, quote, his efforts to plan political activity, that's the standard. You're involved in political activity, they're going to investigate you. We know what this is really about. This is about getting at President Trump. Getting at President Trump. Tried to stop President Trump before he was even elected with the Russia investigation. Tried to remove President Trump from office twice. While he was in office, they tried to do that. And now they're trying to get him after the fact, after he's left. All because this guy cut taxes, reduced regulations, greatest economy in the history, greatest economy in 50 years, lowest unemployment, all because he built the wall, got us out of the Iran deal, put the embassy in Jerusalem. When President Trump was president, Americans got their Christmas presents on time, but they're coming after him. The Reuters story said this: the FBI has found no evidence that President Trump or people directly around him were involved in organizing the violence. They don't care. They don't care the FBI has no evidence. Senate report said no evidence of a coordinated plan. They don't care. They're going to drag these 11 people into subpoenas, in for depositions with subpoenas, because they're so determined to get their political enemies.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Mississippi.
Yield back, thank
you. Madam Chair, the Vice Chair of the committee put in record the fact that the FBI and Department of Justice declared no such thing in terms of January 6th. So the assertion that somehow they've conducted an investigation is just not true. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, the distinguished chairman of the House Intelligence Committee.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, we are here this afternoon to test a proposition as old as the country's founding. Are we a nation of laws? We are here because one man has decided that we are now only a nation of men, and that rich and powerful men need not follow the law. And the question we must confront is nothing less than this: is he right? Are some people now truly above the law, beholden to nothing and no one, free to ignore the law and without consequence? Congress is investigating the worst attack on our Capitol in over a century, made worse still by the fact it was carried out by our own people, people who had been misled to believe that their election had been stolen and that violence was now justified, people who are still being misled by a dangerous lie that may lead to even more bloodshed. This is not some theoretical matter. We were here. We heard the doors breaking, the glass shattering, the cries from outside the chamber, and we saw the bloody results, the officers injured and those who died. And in the wake of the horrors of that day, a day in which the Capitol Police put their lives on the line to defend our democracy, it falls on us to defend that same democracy, albeit at far less risk to ourselves. The founders intended that ambition should be made to check ambition. If we fail to uphold Congress's power to compel information, then we cease to be a co-equal branch of government, unable to perform our oversight or check any abuses of executive power. Take away a court's power to subpoena witnesses, and it fails to be a court. Take away the Congress's ability to do the same, and it fails to be a Congress, becoming instead a mere plaything for a corrupt executive. Do not believe for one moment that if we fail to hold Steve Bannon accountable, that he will be the exception. He will become the rule, not a rule of law, but the misrule of men. Either we are all equal before the law, or none of us is. This is the essence of our democracy. And as Lincoln said, whatever differs from this, to the extent of the difference, is no democracy. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Wyoming.
Could I inquire as to how much time is remaining, Madam Speaker?
The gentlelady from Wyoming has 5.5 minutes. Gentleman from Mississippi has 2 minutes, and the gentleman from Indiana has no time remaining.
All right. I'm prepared to close then, Madam Speaker.
Gentlelady is recognized to close.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, just outside this chamber, over the north door in Statuary Hall, which was the old House chamber, stands a statue of Cleo, the muse of history. She's one of the oldest works of art in our Capitol. She stands in a winged chariot, the chariot of time, and she takes notes in her book, reminding all of us that our words and our actions will be judged by history. History particularly will judge those of us in positions of public trust for what we are doing today. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, Madam Speaker, we all recognized how profoundly wrong January 6th was. My colleague from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, who just suggested that we were here because we opposed President Trump's policies, seems to have forgotten that actually on January 6th, he himself said, quote, "What happened today is wrong and is not what America is about." The next day, Mr. Jordan said, "What happened Wednesday is a tragedy. Everyone knows it's as wrong can be." And today, Madam Speaker, the former president suggested that the violence was justified. My colleagues in the Republican Party, the Republican members of this body, have to understand, have to recognize that there's a moment when politics must stop if we want to defend and protect our institutions. A violent assault on the Capitol to stop a constitutional process of counting electoral votes is that moment. They all knew that on that day. In fact, the minority leader himself stood in this chamber and said, quote, "The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding." Mr. McCarthy was right then. The president bears responsibility. We need to know what happened. This body must have the ability to understand what caused the attack, to understand who was responsible, and to take legislative action to ensure that it never happens again. Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this motion for contempt for Mr. Steve Bannon. I urge them to do so because it is right, it is morally right, it is constitutionally right, and it is all of our duty. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman's recognized.
Over the last hour, we've heard a lot about what we are not debating today. The Select Committee is charged with investigating a deadly attack on the seat of our democracy and making recommendations to ensure it never happens again. I can't think of anything more serious, but many of our colleagues would rather talk about anything else. I think I know why. I think they are performing for an audience of one. I do, however, want to commend my colleagues on the Select Committee for laying out clearly why the House must cite Mr. Bannon for contempt. If our investigation is to succeed, if the House's constitutional authority to investigate and legislate is to remain robust, then we cannot let this man flout the laws with impunity. The Select Committee is made up of people of character, of profound commitment to public service and our Constitution. They all elevate the committee's work. I especially want to thank and acknowledge our Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney, for her leadership and partnership. There's no doubt in my mind that history will record her courage in stark relief. History will record all of what we do here today. We can be on the right side or the wrong side. I urge all my colleagues to remember that as we cast this vote, Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the previous question is ordered on the resolution. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolution
Madam
is
Speaker,
agreed to.
I
For what
request a
purposes? The gentleman from Indiana rise.
Request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device.